Imagine starting your night shift, expecting the usual quiet and uneventful hours ahead. The clock ticks on, and everything feels routine, until, without warning, something changes. The air grows heavy, and an unsettling feeling creeps in, making every shadow seem darker and every sound more ominous. What once felt like an ordinary night begins to twist into something much more horrible. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to explore 3 scary true night shift horror stories. These stories dive into the terrifying moments that have haunted people during their overnight shifts. 1. The haunting shift in the hotel. Ravi worked at a small, isolated hotel on the outskirts of Kerala in India. It was normally dead, but this particular night was different. A furious storm had swept into the town. The hotel that hardly ever experienced full occupancy now came stuffed with people who had nowhere else to go. Activities fill the lobby of the hotel. People check in and out, a storm raging in the outside with rain and howling wind. Ravi had worked at the hotel for years, mostly during the day. He never used to take night shifts, but on account of the chaos, he was asked to stay and assist in the management. It was midnight, and the storm showed no signs of slowing down. The hotel flickered off the generator. Storm noises filled the atmosphere. By 1:30 a.m., all of the guests had retreated to their rooms, and the lobby was finally quiet. Ravi sat alone at the counter, sipping his cup of tea. It was dim in the lobby. There was a heavy strangeness in the air, a quietness that seemed unnatural. He glanced across the lobby to the grand staircase which led up to the upper floors. For just a second, Ravi thought he saw something move. Ravi took it as stress, but it wouldn't subside. Again, he glanced at the staircase, and this time his heart skipped a beat. Standing at the top of the stairs was a figure, pale and motionless. That figure was almost invisible in the flickering light. Ravi gazed at it, trying to understand what he was seeing, but at the same time, something in the figure did not click. It was perfectly motionless, as if waiting. Lightning flashed again, and this time, he saw it clearly. It was not human. It had a face to hide, but the stretched out body seemed unnatural, its arms as if slung far too low, and the skin was the color of moonless night. His heart pounded in his chest, and he sprang up quickly, spilling his tea. The figure on top of the stairs still did not move. A chill wind rattled the lobby. Still, Ravi felt the air growing cold around him, and then a foul smell, like of a dead animal, suddenly filled the lobby. He wanted to get out of there, but his feet seemed glued to the floor. His eyes remained fixed on the figure at the stairs, now slowly coming down the stairs toward him. Just as the figure was passing the very bottom of the stairs, another bolt of lightning snapped. He just closed his eyes, ready for it all to be over with. When he opened them, he was alone in the lobby. The storm outside was still going on with all the rage. Ravi stood there, shaking and trying to piece together what just happened. But then he looked at something on the floor near the foot of the stairs. There was a trail of wet, muddy footprints leading out from where the figure had been. They were many times larger than any footprints he had ever seen. The prints trailed out of the lobby and disappeared into the dark hallway leading to the guest rooms. Ravi knew in his heart that this night would haunt him throughout his lifetime. Ravi couldn't shake the fear gnawing at him, but something inside urged him to follow the footprints. He grabbed a flashlight and slowly made his way toward the dark hallway where the muddy trail led. The corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, the air heavy with that foul, decaying smell that had invaded the lobby. The footprints led him to the farthest room in the hallway. With trembling hands, Ravi pushed the door open. His flashlight beam cut through the thick darkness, and there, swinging ever so slightly from the ceiling, was a man. The man's body hung limply, but he had no head. His neck was a ragged, gaping hole, and the muddy footprints beneath him matched those Ravi had followed. The sight of the headless figure sent an icy wave of terror crashing through him, and he collapsed. When he woke, the sun had already risen. Disoriented and weak, Ravi stumbled to his feet. The terrifying image of the headless man seared into his memory. Without a word to anyone, he quit his job the very next day, leaving behind not just the hotel, but the haunting memories of a storm that brought something far worse than rain, and he was bound and determined never to learn what it truly was. 2. The haunting of aisle 5. Liam used to work in a small town in New Zealand, at a local supermarket. It was the type of place where nothing much ever happened. He would enter the mart at 8 p.m. and spend his entire shift through the silence until 4 a.m. On April 15th, Thomas, who worked at the same store, was struck by a car right in front of the supermarket while leaving after his shift. It was brutal and swift, and Thomas didn't survive. Tragedy stained the road outside the supermarket, leaving the small, tight-knit staff in shock. The supermarket had been closed for 3 days due to respect and grieving the loss of one of the people with which they shared their working lives. On April 18th, the mart was reopened, but something was not right. It wasn't that air of sadness hanging over the place, something else, and very unsettling. The air was colder, heavier, as if the mart itself held its breath. Liam returned to work, forcing himself to think of the constant feeling of dread. The supermarket felt eerily empty that night. Shelf upon shelf loomed in dim light, casting long, strange shadows. The usual distant traffic sounds were oddly muted, leaving the store in almost suffocating silence. Time passed, yet Liam felt a nagging sense that he was not alone. Often he felt that someone stood just beyond his line of vision. He saw quick flashes out of the corner of his eye, only glimpses, a figure darting down an aisle. But by the time he turned, no one was there. Then came the footsteps, quiet at first, almost impossible to detect. But when Liam turned to walk after the noise, the footsteps stopped. There was no one there, and yet, every time in a different part of the market, as though something unseen roams about that place. It was past midnight before the odd occurrences became impossible to ignore. The fluorescent lights above the aisles glared periodically. Every time the light went out, Liam's heart thudded. His eyes darted frantically over the dim place for any movement. During those split seconds of darkness, he saw the outline of a figure at the far end of the mart. Tall, motionless, waiting. He was setting new stock upon the shelves when suddenly he heard a sharp noise, like a can or box falling. He turned to glance down the aisle, but it was deserted. Everything was clean and spotless. Something a little scarier happened around 3 a.m. As Liam passed the checkout counters, the automatic doors at the entrance, which were somehow closed, slid open by themselves. Cold air rushed into the store. The hairs on the back of his neck stand right up. He's frozen in position, staring at the open doors, waiting for them to close again. They didn't. There was another flicker of lights, but this time they did not abandon their grip. And in these he saw Thomas. His figure was indistinct and ghostly, floating near the very aisle where he used to serve. His face was deathly pale, his eyes fixed open as if he'd literally frozen. Every time the lights flickered on, Thomas was closer. First by the aisle, then near the counters, and finally nearly within feet of Liam. Panic had him frozen in place, unable to move, even to turn away. As soon as the flickering stopped once again, the light went out. Liam felt a surge of dread wash over him. Just as he was about to check the electricity, he heard a sound, like water dripping. He took his flashlight and followed the noise, his heart pounding with each step. It led him to a dark corner of the store where he was met with a horrific sight. Drops of blood falling from a cap lying on the floor, the very cap Thomas used to wear. The moment Liam saw it, screams filled the supermarket, echoes of the terror that had unfolded on that tragic night when Thomas died. They reverberated through the aisles, a haunting reminder of the tragedy. Overcome with horror, Liam ran, not daring to look back, fear propelling him out of the store and into the night. He never returned to the supermarket. Whatever haunted those nights after Thomas's death wasn't something he could explain. It wasn't just grief or the lingering sadness of loss. It was something darker, something that twisted the familiar into a nightmare. Liam knew he could never face another night like that again. 3. The Watcher in the Factory. Miguel worked at night at an abandoned textile factory in a small industrial town in Portugal. Still, the factory performed a few hours at night, making leftovers of fabrics on the ground to offer other local artisans. Miguel would often find himself alone. All the noise was the distant buzzing of machines. The first night spent in the factory was hauntingly empty. When the clock struck midnight, there was chillness in the air, and the temperature began to drop. And with this, he felt an uneasy feeling inside his head, feeling that something unconscious was watching in the darkness. He shook off his head as if to send away the thoughts of mere fatigue. He was looking around 1 a.m. when he heard something soft thudding on the far side. He was intrigued and took his flashlight and began making his way through the deserted aisles of abandoned looms and equipment. When he neared the sound, all was nothing more than emptiness, rusted machinery, and memories disappearing in it. Every few minutes, he would feel flashes of movement at the side of his vision, dark shapes darting in and out of the machines. He tried to tell himself it was just his brain playing tricks on him. Then at 2 a.m., there was a clanging. It was louder and insistent this time. Miguel's heart pounding, he ran toward the noise. The sound came from the loading dock. The great big room where all the crates were kept lay opposite. The remains of old machinery littered the floor. In the darkness of the dock, he saw a figure half concealed in darkness, watching him. Its features' presence was acute, heavy with some sort of energy. Miguel was totally frozen as the figure seemed to shift slightly, revealing a glimmer of something sinister lurking. Panicked, he reached for the door, but it did not open, and then whispers started, hushed, indistinguishable murmurs against his skin. Shadows in the room grew dense and dancing as if they were alive. In his last, desperate bid to get out of there, he hammered on the door. The soft voices became cacophony. Just as he could not stand it any longer, he was pushed outside against his will by a sudden swipe of the door opening wide. The factory remained quiet, as if nothing at all had occurred there. He looked around once again for the figure, but found only dull machinery that now eerily seemed silent. Then, at 3 a.m., Miguel was jolted by the unmistakable sound of sewing machines whirring to life. This time he knew it was not normal. Hesitating, he moved cautiously toward the source of the noise. As he approached, the shadows turned into the shapes of women, sewing clothes in an endless loop. Miguel's heart raced as he took in the surreal scene. The flickering lights illuminated their pale faces. Suddenly, a swarm of needles flew toward him. He barely had time to react as 2 needles struck him in the face, piercing through the darkness. Panic surged within him as screams filled the factory. He ran out of the factory. Fabrics tumbled off the shelves as the room erupted into chaos. The women's spectral laughter mixed with the cacophony, creating a nightmarish symphony. Terrified, Miguel turned and ran, the shadows and whispers closing in behind him. He sprinted through the factory. Finally bursting through the main door, he stumbled into the cool night air, gasping for breath. Behind him, the factory loomed, dark and ominous. He knew he could never return to that place. The next morning, Miguel resigned from work and simply could not seem to shake the feeling he was being followed. The factory now stood as a dark memory, that night which would chase him all his life. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more creepy stories. Which of these stories gave you a thrilling experience? Let us know. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are real.